Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're ready to get underway here. Episode 3 in the Corporate Pilot Professional series. In today's episode, we're going to cover the takeoff and associated N1 ITT behavior of the Citation 2 aircraft. A little bit about climb, pretty self-explanatory, but there are some things I want to discuss in the climb phase. Once we get up to a safe altitude, we're then going to level off and do some maneuvers for you in the sim. That way you can replicate them if you would like in your sim to kind of get the feel and handling of this aircraft with some little nuances that you may or may not be aware of by now if you've been flying it around in your desktop simulator. So before we get completely underway here with the takeoff, I want to give a huge shout out to Raya, R-Y-A, from the Discord. He has put the checklist that I originally created into an X checklist. So you can use the C-list file that he put in the Discord and run the X checklist program for the Citation 2. It's absolutely fantastic. Shout out to Raya. Two more shout outs. D Monies put the checklist in a more concise format, if you would like that. And also Siawan, or Siawan, hope I'm pronouncing that right, put the checklist in a type of picturesque professional outline here to make it a little bit more pleasing on the eye. So you have multiple versions now of how to display the checklist that are available in the Discord on the downloads and documents section of the Corporate Jet Professional section. So it's going to be pretty important because at the end of the checklist, there is some limitations on the engine that we have to discuss for takeoff. So let's get this thing started. Right now we're sitting on Sedona Airport, runway 21. That's where we started the pre-flight and we've taxied out to the runway. I've got the simulator paused here. If you want to follow along and do this flight with me, I will show you my weight and balance. It's pretty standard out of the gate here what Coronado gives you. This is about 2,700 pounds of fuel on the aircraft. That's just under 3 hours of flight time, 11,900 total weight, well under our max takeoff. But it's not super light, it's not super heavy. It's a good median for just doing some basic handling characteristics of the aircraft. Now, of course, if you're taking off with less fuel, lighter payload, it's going to fly a little bit different. You're going to have a little bit more performance. If you're flying heavier or maxed out, you're going to have the opposite effect is true. So those are the settings for that. It is Cavoke weather, no wind, calm, standard day, 299 or 2 on the altimeter. All right, into the cockpit we go. Let's talk about a couple of instruments here that we are going to be focusing our attention on during takeoff. Now, there are two gauges, the N1 fan and the ITT, or internal temperature gauge. If you bring up my checklist here, at the end of the checklist, you'll notice that there are some limitations with regards to internal temperature. Engine limits maximum permissible interturbine gas temperatures. For takeoff, the limit is 710 degrees Celsius. Well, if you look at that right there, where's that red line? 710 Celsius. It begins at 690 C, the amber mark. That would correspond with maximum continuous. So we're not necessarily focused too much on what is our N1 percentage. Are we at 100% N1? Are we 95% N1? With these engines, we are really going to be focusing on the ITT part of power setting. There's also a transient temperature limitation of 730 C for 2 seconds. So technically you could go past 710 for 2 seconds and then of course back down. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Maybe there's an engine failure or something like that and you accidentally overboosted. Now, one thing you also have to understand is these engines are capable of going over 100% N1 fan speed. If you can see here, it shows that the N1 fan maximum permissible rotor operating speeds is actually 106% RPM. So you're not always going to just have 100% takeoff thrust. You may have a little bit more, you may have a little bit less. But for X-plane purposes, I want to make this clear. It says for X-plane, simplifying the process. When you are setting your power for takeoff or any phase of flight, you need to be looking at both of these gauges right here. The ITT is what's going to bite you. A lot of days when it's not standard, especially we're in summertime right now, if you're flying with real world weather and it's hot out, you will become what's called ITT limited for your takeoff roll. You may reach 710 Celsius before reaching 100% N1 fan speed. You may be sitting at 95, 96. Just depends on the conditions and the atmospheric conditions that the aircraft is feeling at that moment in time. So, in today's example with the standard altimeter of 299 or 2, and temperature about 5 degrees Celsius at this airport field elevation at 4,700 feet, we're going to be totally fine. We're going to be able to set our N1 where we want to set it. Now, there is a reference here, kind of like an EPIR bug that you have in the 737-200 to fly JSIM stuff, if you're familiar with the EPIR bugs. This is kind of what this is. It's just a reminder of what your power is going to be. In real life, there's a lot of stipulations that go into what your power setting is going to be. For X-Plane, I want you guys to just focus on leaving it at 100%. As you get more experience with the aircraft, you can go above 100%. Make sure you're still below 106 and make sure you're within ITT limits. But for very basic operation, just set 100 and worry about getting to 100% N1 and not over temping. As you get more comfortable, you can experiment with a little bit higher fan speeds. So I'm going to set 100 there just as a reminder. Now, when you set power in the aircraft for takeoff, you want to make sure you do it smoothly but promptly. You don't want to ram these engines forward and have a potential to damage the engine, because it is not a fade at control. When you move these thrust levers, they're moving the engine. The power output of the engine is changing corresponding to the speed that you move these throttle levers. So make sure you move them slowly but promptly. All right, we'll go ahead and unpause the simulator here. Back to the cockpit. Make sure my pitot heat is on there. I think I left that when I reset the flight. So we're set up. Flaps are at 7 degrees. There they are. They are now. Flaps are at 7 degrees for takeoff. One other thing, I'm not going to talk about flight directors for this. We're doing all automation off. This is hand flying only. We are going to set an altitude as a reference. We're going to go ahead and climb up to 12,000 feet. We'll have that set right there, just as a reminder. And the flight director is off. Autopilot is off. It's just going to be a complete manual takeoff. One thing I like to do, depending on where you're taking off from, you may have your course needle, you may not be tracking anything, but it may be sitting out there like this, off to the side. What I like to do, just as a reference, I'm going to set it to runway heading. I know it's about 214 degrees. So now I just have a very rough and dirty idea of what the runway is. So if I take off and I fly a heading, 240, if I have to come back around to the airport, I just have some type of reference. So even though I'm not tracking this OBS needle, I'm going to set it as runway heading so it kind of emulates a little bit of a runway center line there. Now, I always like to fly with my heading bug synced. I actually have that bound to my HOTAS setup there, so I can adjust the heading bug left and right and also sync it without having to take my hands off my HOTAS. So that's important. I have that set up as well. This airplane has very efficient wings. We're going to talk about this more in cruise, but the wings on this Citation are straight wings. They are very efficient at creating lift, especially when they're in the neutral position or wings level position. So wings level, just climbing, you're going to have great performance. So as corporate pilots, we want to always be anticipatory of radical changes of the aircraft. We do not want to be climbing at 500 feet per minute, then all of a sudden we're descending at 1,000 feet. We don't want to be going up and down, up and down. Smooth is where we want to be. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Make slow corrections at first, make sure they are smooth, and over time your corrections will become fast. Inherently, I'm going to tell you right now, when you take off the airplane, it does like to pitch up once you get that rotation going, and it's going to want to start climbing like a rocket, especially with this type of atmospheric condition out here and the loadout that we have. I've bugged 180 knots. I think that is a perfect climb out speed for this airplane. It gives you a good climb rate, and it also will get you out of the terminal area if you're in a busy sector. Say you're on VATSIM, you're flying out of San Francisco or big international airport, you got Airbuses, you got 747s behind you. They're all going to be climbing out 250. Boom, gear up, they clean up, they're going 250 before you know it. We can't do 250 in the climb out. I mean, you might be able to get away with it depending on what your loadout is, but 180 knots is going to be a good median. You don't want to be going out at 140, climbing pretty good, but you're not moving anywhere. So 180 knots is where I set the bug. Let's go ahead and walk through a takeoff here. I'm going to release the parking brake. I got my track IR on. I'll try to keep it as smooth as I can. I'm going to go ahead and move those thrust levers up. I'm looking for about 30 to 40% N1 just to stabilize them there. There's my 40% stable. I'm going to come off the brakes, and here we go. Smooth but prompt acceleration of the throttle levers. I'm looking at both my ITT and my N1 fan. I'm looking for 100% N1, not to exceed 710C. I went a little bit past it there. Let's go ahead and walk them back. I'm at 102%. I'm well within ITT limits. That's fine. Airspeed's alive. Here comes 80 knots. It happens fast. You got to be moving. Here comes 100 knots. Nice gentle rotation on the stick. She's going to want to just lift off. Positive rate, gear up. It looks cooler the second you get them up. Now, right here, pause. Right here, I'm pausing the simulator. I'm in transition. I've got the gear coming up, and I'm in my rotation. The aircraft is already lifted off the ground, and the vertical speed is going to begin to build up very rapidly. You could see here I overshot my intended mark of 100% N1, but that's okay. I'm still well below the 710 ITT limit there. Not a big deal. This is what I'm talking about. You don't want to be too focused on trying to set the exact N1 and all of a sudden you blow through your speed. You're doing 120 knots on the runway. You haven't rotated yet. So set your target, but really be watching this ITT. Me personally, I never wanted to see that go above 700. Matter of fact, I like to keep it at 690 if I can, depending on the runway. Now, if performance requires me to have maximum performance or more performance, of course, I'm going to put the engines where they need to be to meet those restrictions. But for this situation, long, dry runway, light load, save the engines, fly it like you own it. The owner will appreciate it. And if he appreciates what you're doing, you're going to keep your job with him. At this point, I know the aircraft is going to be starting to really accelerate in the climb and in the pitch phase. This is where I like to go ahead and get a couple clicks of nose down trim. So I'm going to try to keep my microphone closer to my yoke so you can hear when I'm applying that trim. What is a good way to lower my vertical speed in the climb out? We can trim, we can manually push forward on the yoke, but one other thing, flaps. We've got our takeoff flaps at 7 degrees. We are well above our flap speed now. We're 125 knots. We can get those flaps retracted, and that's going to help. As we retract those flaps, it's going to help with that climb rate, bring that climb rate down so we're not super aggressive. So I like to kind of blend a little bit of trim, a little bit of pitch, and feel that flap change and really get that aircraft set nice and smooth. So we'll unpause here, look at the pitch. I'm going to go ahead, flaps up, a couple of clicks of nose down trim, and I'm going to park that attitude indicator right in between the 10s there. You can see my airspeed is climbing rapidly now. I'm 140 knots. The aircraft is clean. The flaps are up. And I'm just going to keep that attitude right in that 10-degree mark. That's going to have a nice acceleration of speed. I'm looking for 180 knots. I'm just going to fly straight out so we can have maximum focus here on aircraft handling. So we're starting to get a little bit slower in the acceleration. That's fine. Monitor those ITTs. Matter of fact, I'm going to just go ahead and bring it right back to 100%. Get that ITT down just a tad. Here comes 180 knots. It's almost perfect at this load if you keep the pitch attitude right at 10 degrees. All right, so now that we've got our pitch attitude set and our throttles are down to about 100% N1 there, I really want to talk about our cruise climb configuration for the airplane. Now, very similar to the takeoff position where we were looking at, 100% N1 and we're really focused on that 710 ITT limit. For climb, it's kind of the same thing. However, we want to make sure we're within the continuous ITT limitation. The continuous ITT limitation is 690 degrees Celsius, which is the beginning of that amber bar there on the ITT scale. So you can go ahead and set 690. You can also go a little bit below it if you want to be a little bit more cautious. Cross-check your N1s. Most of the time you want to have those N1s below 100% there just to keep the engines nice and quiet, more passenger comfort. But again, if it's performance related, then go ahead and put the engines where they need to be. Make sure your ITT is in the continuous or below of 690, and that will be your power setting for the climb out. As you get higher in altitude, we're only climbing up to 12,000 feet in this example, but as you continue your climb out, you may need to adjust your throttle position to make sure that your ITTs are not becoming too hot, or that you may actually be able to increase power a little bit as the air gets a little bit more thin and you're in the higher flight levels. So now just a little bit of nose down trim, and we're pretty much set for a 180-degree climb out. We're at 100% N1. Our ITTs are 690. That is our maximum permissible continuous. Hey, this corporate jet is my livelihood for this owner. Let's go ahead and bump it down. Let's just bump it down to like 99%. We don't need the extra thrust right now. Let's keep those ITTs well within limits. So we're at 99% thrust, 177. A little bit more nose down trim there. Vertical speed comes up a little bit. We're out of 10,000 feet, so let's go ahead and turn off some of our exterior lights. I'm using my HOTAS to do that. If you don't have them bound, you'll probably have to come down here and click your lights off. All right, we're 1,000 feet to go. Pause the sim. At this point, the aircraft has been climbing out very smoothly. We had a nice smooth transition. We used the decrease in lift by retracting the flaps to help compensate for an over-exaggerated climb out in the takeoff configuration. So instead of keeping those flaps out and manually pushing the yoke forward and trimming all the way down and then retracting the flaps and then having to trim back up and pull aft on the yoke, we combined the flap retraction with trim and a little bit of flight control yoke pressure to make a nice smooth transition into our climb out at 180 knots. Now that we're getting ready to level at 12,000 feet, we can see that we're still going pretty good here. We're at 10.9. We're climbing almost 4,000 feet a minute. So it's important to understand, and this is one thing that I take away. When I flew the Citation for the very first time, one thing that I noticed was the flight control pressure was much heavier than I was accustomed to. Now, bear in mind that the Citation 2 was the first jet that I flew. So I'm not saying that this one is specifically heavier. Coming from light GA aircraft, I remember the feel and the feedback from this yoke. And it's a lot more pronounced in the real airplane. And what I noticed was I was trying to muscle the yoke more than I should have been. And what you need to understand is the way the engines are mounted on this airplane, these tail-mounted engines. The manipulation of thrust will really help with your pitch attitude changes. Sometimes, to get the pitch down to where you need it to be, you really need to get that thrust back to help you out. Because if you don't, you're going to be running that trim wheel full forward, full aft, and you're going to be working extra hard. So use the thrust levers as an advantage to you to get the pitch where you want it to be. So I'm going to execute the level off here. I'm going to try my best to talk through it, but I want you to pay attention to the N1 and how much I move the thrust levers back to help me get that nose down. So there's our altitude alerter. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and just start pulling that power back. A little bit of trim. You don't want to float your passengers in the back, trust me. They will not appreciate that. Here comes 200 feet. Now, one thing that I like to do at 200 feet is I like to be below 1,000 feet per minute. Now, as I'm trying to walk you through this discussion here, I'm kind of screwing this up already because I got my speed dropping and I'm at 100 feet to go and I'm still above 1,000. Typically, 200 feet prior to level off, I like to see this VSI needle at 1,000 or less. Now, I kind of prematurely pulled the power out there without getting that trim in there, and that's why my airspeed has decayed a little bit. I needed a little bit more nose down trim before I really started moving that power because that would help keep my speed at 180. 10 knots, not a huge loss though. Let's see if we can remedy the situation here. All right, so alright, so we had a little bit of a burble there, but we're pretty much going to be stable here. 12,000 feet. Get a little bit of trim in there. Trim those pressures off of your yoke and lock it in. So there's 12,000 feet. Now, with that digital altimeter, it's very easy to get obsessive compulsive about being exactly 1 foot on, 1 foot off. But if you start chasing that, you're going to start doing this right here. You're going to start going a little bit too far down, and you're going to start coming up, and you're going to start making these movements here, which really can get annoying to a passenger in the back. So lock it in at 12,000, get that trim in there, and do your best to maintain that flight attitude nice and smooth. All right, so now that the aircraft is leveled off 12,000 feet and 180 knots, we're going to do a set of maneuvers here to conclude this video, and I'm going to explain to you some of the characteristics and handling characteristics of this airplane and its wing design so that you may better control this aircraft when you are operating in tight environments. Maybe you're doing circling approaches, you're doing traffic pattern work, or you're just doing a fun approach, and to understand the aerodynamics behind the airplane will really help you become a better master of your craft at flying this airplane in and out of tight spaces. So first, we got to understand that this is a supercritical airfoil technology. The Citation 2 actually was modified, the wing design was modified, and most of the changes they made with the Citation 2 was aerodynamic. And it has an unswept tapered wing with a high aspect ratio of 7.8. So essentially, this wing is very efficient at creating lift. Now, it's not a very fast wing, so we can talk, technical terms with aspect ratios, supercritical airfoil section thickness ratios. I can tell you, that the ratio will vary 14% at the wing root to 12% at the tip. All that stuff is technical, but what it means to us as pilots is that because of the design of this wing, you are able to operate this aircraft into airports that are typically serviced by propeller-driven aircraft, and you can even take it on airports that aren't paved. That was the design behind the Citation 2. So sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as the slowtation. The reason it's a slowtation is because of this wing design. It is so straight and flat. It is so efficient in creating lift, it's not very fast. You look at the fastest jets, they have very high swept wings. You even have Delta airfoils. This is not a super fast airplane, but what it does good is performance for getting you up in the air and of course getting you down and stopped in short distances. One way we can demonstrate this is by mastering steep turn maneuvers. When you put the aircraft into a bank, we're going to kill the vertical component of lift. As you reduce the vertical component of lift, as you increase bank angle, you're going to have to adjust with pitch. As you adjust with pitch, you're now going to be set and nice and stable at that high bank angle. But as you begin to roll out, what's going to happen? We're going to increase our vertical component of lift, which means the airplane is going to begin to climb. So we're going to need to retrim, reconfigure the aircraft for level flight. And this is very pronounced in any aircraft that has this wing design. So doing this maneuver, I highly encourage you to just get out and do it for fun and try it. And if you master it, it's really going to help you master the control of the aircraft. So we'll come back into the cockpit. I'm going to unpause the simulator. We're 12,000 feet. Everything is set. The autopilot's off. You want to make sure before you start the maneuver that you are completely trimmed out and stable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set my heading bug to 180 degrees, 180. I'm also going to set my OBS over there just kind of to remind me. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a steep turn to the left, and then we're going to do a steep turn to the right. These are maneuvers that you probably practice. If you're going through private pilot training, you probably do these maneuvers right now. So we are going to get a bank angle limit, but that's okay. We're going to let it roll. So here we go. Into the left. As I roll in, I'm going to pause it real quick there, and instinctively I corrected it. But if you watch what happened as soon as I began to roll, especially as I get past 30 degrees, 45 degrees, what I'm going to do is I want to put this diamond right here on this diamond. We're going to lock it in at that bank angle. But what I instinctively did was already increase my back pressure. But as I kill that component of lift, the aircraft is going to want to descend. So I'm going to add back pressure. I'm going to add a little bit of trim, about 2 swipes of the trim wheel in the airplane, or like 2 solid clicks on your yoke. And then we're going to lock in that bank angle and go all the way around until we're at 360. As we begin the rollout, we're going to have to undo what we did during the turn. So we're going to have to trim down, and we're going to have to push a little bit forward pressure on the stick. So here we go. Unpause the sim.
Bank angle. Bank
Let's lock in that bank angle. You can see it. See, there's that wants to descend. So get back up to 12,000 feet.
Bank angle. Bank angle.
Lock it in.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
Once your trim is set,
Bank angle. Bank angle.
all you got to do is just maintain that bank angle. Maybe just a little bit of power, maybe 2 or 3%.
Bank angle. Bank angle.
We're holding that 12,000 foot.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
Speed is good.
Bank angle.
Getting a little bit low, 20 feet low there. Make a correction. Don't let it settle on you. You can tell I'm definitely out of practice. All right, here comes 360. I'm going to roll out. Now watch what happens. I'm not doing anything other than rolling wings level. As I'm rolling wings level, look at my VSI. It's beginning to climb. Now, I'm going to go right into a turn to the right, so I'm going to just use a little forward pressure, get that horizontal component of lift. All right, so after my game decided to crash there, I reloaded the sim and hopped into it, and we did our turn to the right. Now, one thing that you want to be aware of is this maneuver is going to be pretty tricky for the new flight simmer or somebody who's new to aviation. The whole key here is to be able to do several different things at once. We are maintaining a good scan of our bank angle, our altitude, and our airspeed, and we're also able to understand how the aerodynamics of the wings on this citation are going to react to these different situations at different bank angles and different angles of attack. So I encourage you to get up there, try doing a couple steep turns to the left, to the right, play around with the different phases of the vertical component of lift, and it's going to make you a better pilot when it's time to make that circle to land on a VOR approach, or you're doing a tight turn on a departure procedure around terrain. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Corporate Pilot Professional Series. I will see you again here very soon on episode 4.